What happens when love, patience, and second chances still aren't enough? I thought I was building a family, but instead, I found myself drowning in silence, resentment, and rejection from the very people I was trying to love. It all started 5 years ago when I met my husband. He had lost his first wife the year before and was trying to navigate life as a single dad to 2 young children, ages 4 and 2. He was honest from the beginning. He told me he wasn't struggling so much with parenting as he was with the loneliness. He missed having someone to come home to, someone to talk to, someone to share the little moments with. We started dating casually, and it didn't take long before things became serious. As we got closer, he introduced me to his kids after about 7 months of dating seriously. I was nervous, of course, but hopeful. At first, things seemed to be going fairly well. The kids were young, and while they were naturally cautious around me, they also warmed up in small but meaningful ways. I made sure not to push too hard or step over any boundaries. I was trying to be respectful, knowing that these children had already been through so much loss and confusion. But even then, there were signs that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. His late wife's family wasn't thrilled to hear that another woman was spending time with the kids. There were murmurs, quiet judgment, and passive-aggressive comments passed through the grapevine. When I brought this up to my husband, he brushed it off. He told me it was just a temporary reaction and that things would blow over with time. He said it was natural for them to feel protective, and I believed him. I wanted to believe him because I loved him, and I already cared about his kids. Despite those early hints of tension, we kept moving forward. We got married 2 years ago, officially blending our lives. I went into it with hope, believing that love, consistency, and time would help everyone settle into our new reality. I wanted to be a supportive wife and a steady, caring presence in the kids' lives, not to replace their mother, but to add to the circle of people who love them. I thought I was doing everything right. I was kind, involved, patient. I offered help when needed and backed off when it seemed appropriate. But the shift started slowly. The kids became colder, more resistant. Their behavior toward me changed, not just disobedient in the normal way kids can be, but dismissive and sometimes cruel. The bond I thought we had begun to form was unraveling. And worse, my husband stopped noticing, or maybe he didn't want to notice. Looking back, I realize I had no idea how deeply unprepared we were for the emotional complexity of blending a grieving family. I underestimated how much resistance would come not just from the kids, but from the people around them. I stepped into this relationship with love and good intentions, but I was slowly being cast as the villain in someone else's story. And the person who was supposed to be in my corner, my husband, didn't he see what was happening until it was already too late. Looking back, I realize I had no idea how deeply unprepared we were for the emotional complexity of blending a grieving family. I underestimated how much resistance would come not just from the kids, but from the people around them. I stepped into this relationship with love and good intentions, but I was slowly being cast as the villain in someone else's story. And the person who was supposed to be in my corner, my husband, didn't see what was happening until it was already too late. The shift became clearer after we got married. It was like flipping a switch. The small acts of defiance from the kids turned into patterns of disrespect, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. The way they responded to me wasn't the same as how they acted around their dad. They started to push boundaries harder, ignored me when I spoke, and resisted even the simplest requests, ones they used to follow without issue. Their behavior toward me felt intentionally cold and defiant, while they remained mostly cooperative with him. At first, I thought it was just the adjustment phase people talked about. A new marriage, a new dynamic, it made sense for there to be bumps along the way. But when the behavior continued and even intensified, I began raising my concerns with my husband. I told him how I felt, how I noticed the kids only acted this way with me, how it hurt to be constantly disrespected in my own home. But his reaction was always the same dismissive, vague reassurance that they just need time or they'll grow out of it. He never really addressed what I was saying, and worse, he never stepped in when things happened right in front of him. Over time, I felt the burden of parenting fall more and more on my shoulders. He slowly stopped doing things he used to do, like handling the drop-offs and pickups to their maternal grandparents' house. That task became mine, and it quickly became something I dreaded. The kids' maternal family never accepted me. Every visit meant icy glares, passive hostility, and awkward tension. If I had to remind the kids to grab their jackets or to be polite, I'd be met with judgmental looks or whispered comments. I told my husband about it, hoping for backup or support. He shrugged it off, told me not to take it personally, and left me to manage it alone. The worst part was when the kids started parroting back things they clearly heard from their mom's family. They began saying I wasn't to their real mom and that I couldn't to tell them what to do. One day, they outright called me a stupid bitch who was trying to replace their mom. That cut deep, not just because of the words, but because they came from children I had cared for, loved, and tried so hard to connect with. But they stormed off mid-sentence. And once again, my husband didn't step in. He didn't even try. Instead of feeling like a partner, I felt like an outsider in my own home. A stranger raising someone else's kids while being quietly resented for even trying. Instead of feeling like a partner, I felt like an outsider in my own home. A stranger raising someone else's kids while being quietly resented for even trying. Then I found out I was pregnant. At first, I wanted to believe this might be a fresh start for our family. A baby, a new chapter, a symbol of hope and unity. My husband was thrilled. He smiled more, started talking about nursery colors and names. But the kids? Their reaction was the opposite. They were withdrawn, visibly upset, and barely acknowledged the news. I told myself they just needed time, that this was a big change, and they were probably scared or confused. I tried to give them space while also gently including them, hoping they'd feel like they were part of it all. But the more I tried, the more they pulled away. I talked to my husband again. I told him I was worried, not just for me, but for the baby too. That things were already tense, and if we didn't get ahead of it, it would only get worse once the baby was here. I brought up counseling, both marriage therapy and family counseling. I wanted us to get support, to have a space where someone could help us navigate this together. He said he'd think about it. Then he said things would get better on their own. Then, as always, he did nothing. And just like everything else, he started pulling back again. The emotional and practical labor became mine, scheduling doctor appointments, managing the household, and still trying to hold space for two grieving children who saw me as the enemy. Even dropping the kids off to their grandparents, something he had always handled, became my responsibility again. Every visit was filled with cold stares and passive-aggressive remarks. It didn't matter how polite or respectful I was. I had been branded the other woman, and the kids were clearly being fed that narrative. Their behavior grew worse as my pregnancy progressed. They ignored me, insulted me, refused even the smallest requests. My husband rarely stepped in, and when I tried to hold basic boundaries, I became mean or controlling. There was one day that broke me more than most. I simply asked the kids to carry their plates to the sink so I could wash up. They refused. When I reminded them I was the adult in charge while their dad was out, they exploded, yelling that I wasn't their real mom and didn't get to boss them around. Then came the awful words again, the ones that still sting. I sat down that night and cried. Not just because of what was said, but because I was doing all of this alone. I was pregnant, exhausted, and heartbroken, and still trying to parent kids who actively hated me, while my husband stood on the sidelines like it wasn't his problem. When our baby boy was born, I prayed things might shift, that maybe holding their little brother would spark something tender in them, that they'd feel connected to him. But the baby didn't change anything. They didn't bond. In fact, they rejected him just like they had me. There was no magical sibling connection, just more distance, more coldness, and more silence from my husband. I wasn't just being ignored anymore, I was invisible, and so was our son. I wasn't just being ignored anymore, I was invisible, and so was our son. I didn't give up right away. Even though everything in me was screaming that I was being pushed to the edge, I still tried. I brought up therapy again, not just for the marriage, but for the whole family. I begged my husband to listen. I told him we were drowning. I told him that if things didn't change, I didn't see how we could stay together. He nodded, said he understood, made promises, but never followed through. There was always a reason. Work was too busy, the timing wasn't right, things would calm down soon, but they never did. Meanwhile, I was barely holding things together. My days revolved around caring for a newborn, trying to keep the household afloat, and constantly being at odds with children who wanted nothing to do with me or their baby brother. On top of that, I was the one still managing their relationship with their maternal grandparents, who continued to treat me like an intruder. Anytime I called them to ask if they could pick the kids up instead of me doing the drive, I was met with cold disapproval or outright hostility. I'd hear things like, "Well, if you can't handle being a stepmother, maybe you shouldn't have married their father." I stopped trying to defend myself. There was no point. The tension after those visits was undeniable. The kids would come back more distant, more disrespectful. I could feel the energy shift every time. It was like someone was reinforcing their belief that I was the enemy, that I didn't belong, that I was trying to erase their mother, but I wasn't. I never wanted to replace her. I only wanted to love the kids and create a safe, peaceful home. But without support, that goal became impossible. One of my close friends, someone who had lost a parent at a young age and experienced life with a step-parent, sat me down one day and told me the hard truth. She said that unless my husband started stepping up and doing the emotional work with his children, nothing would change. She told me that my continued involvement without his partnership would only deepen the kids' resentment toward me, that I'd become the symbol of everything they felt was taken from them, even if I wasn't the cause. And worst of all, she warned me that my son would eventually grow up in a home full of tension and rejection, that I'd be drained and bitter if I kept living like this. And she was right. Still, I tried one last time. I sat down with my stepkids and told them again how much I cared, that I wasn't here to replace their mother or take them away from anyone, that I was just another person in their lives who wanted to love and care for them, that they didn't want to hear it. They stormed off like before. I went to my husband that night and asked him again to go to counseling. I said I couldn't live like this anymore, that our baby deserved better, that I deserved better. But he brushed me off again. Same words, same excuses, same silence. That S when I realized something painful but true. It wasn't to just the kids who didn't he want me. He didn't really want me either. At least not in the way I needed, not as a partner. Not as a mother trying to hold a broken family together alone. That S when I realized something painful but true. It wasn't to just the kids who didn't to want me. He didn't really want me either. At least not in the way I needed, not as a partner. Not as a mother trying to hold a broken family together alone. After everything I had tried, after every moment I had swallowed my pain and held on to hope, I finally reached my breaking point. It came just after Christmas, a time that's supposed to be filled with warmth and connection. But in our house, it was filled with tension, cold shoulders, and complete emotional detachment. I had spent the holidays trying to create something special for everyone. I decorated the house, cooked meals, wrapped gifts, and tried my hardest to involve the kids in festive activities. But the distance had never felt greater. My baby's first Christmas felt like a performance I was doing alone, surrounded by people who didn't even want me there. So I made a decision I had been avoiding for too long. I packed up mine and my son's things and I left. I went to my parents' house, the one place where I knew I wouldn't be treated like I was invisible. The very next day, I filed for divorce. I don't think my husband believed I would actually follow through with it. Maybe he thought I was bluffing or just emotional. He had spent so long dismissing my feelings that it probably never occurred to him that I might actually leave. For the first couple of weeks, he stayed quiet. Then the messages started, promises to do better, confessions that he hadn't realized how serious things had become, offers to go to therapy, to change. He finally said all the things I had begged him to say for years. But by then, I was emotionally numb. It wasn't that I didn't want to believe him, it's that I couldn't, not anymore. I had already carried the weight of this family on my back for years, and now that I had put it down, I couldn't pick it back up just because he had finally noticed I was gone. I told him it was too late. That's when the guilt campaign started. He told me we were a family, that the kids couldn't lose another mom. His parents, who had barely acknowledged me during our marriage, suddenly reached out to tell me I needed to make this work, that it wasn't fair to the kids, that it's never too late when children are involved. But no one had said those things when I was silently suffering in that house. No one had checked in on me when I was being insulted by children, dismissed by my husband, and treated like a stranger by his in-laws. Now, suddenly, I mattered only because I was leaving. Only because I was no longer willing to sacrifice myself to keep a broken family functioning. It's not that I don't care about the kids. I do. I always have. But I was never given the chance to be anything more than a shadow in their lives. And I refuse to raise my son in a home where love and respect are so one-sided. So no, I don't think I'm the villain here. I think I'm just someone who finally chose herself,